The living room looked like something out of a luxury home magazine that Christmas morning. The tree stood tall in the corner, draped in gold and silver ornaments that caught the light from the chandelier above. The dining table was set with imported china, crystal glasses, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. Extended family members filled every corner of the space. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even distant relatives who only showed up when the food was guaranteed to be expensive. Everyone was dressed in their finest, sipping champagne, exchanging pleasantries about vacations in Dubai and new car purchases. The air smelled of roasted turkey, fresh roses, and something I had learned to recognize over the years: performative family harmony. My stepmother stood at the head of the table, glass raised, her smile wide and practiced. She had that particular glow that came from knowing she was the center of attention, the orchestrator of this perfect morning. Her voice rang out clear and warm as she began what I knew would be her annual performance. She gestured toward my stepbrother, who sat beside her, looking pleased with himself, and launched into a speech about his recent promotion at the law firm. The room erupted in polite applause. She detailed every accomplishment, every milestone, every reason why he was the pride of the family. Then her eyes slid toward me. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced by something that resembled pity mixed with condescension. The shift was so subtle that anyone who didn't know her well might have missed it. She tilted her head slightly, that practiced smile returning, but colder now, sharper. "And of course," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we have our dear one here too." She gestured toward me with her champagne glass, and I felt every pair of eyes in the room turn in my direction. This is the one still figuring things out. You know how it is. Some of us take the traditional path, and others, well, they take their time discovering what they want to be when they grow up. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Someone coughed. An aunt looked down at her plate. My stepbrother smirked into his napkin. My stepmother wasn't finished. She never was. "We call this one our little dreamer, always on that laptop, always with some new idea that never quite pans out. But hey, maybe next Christmas we'll have something real to celebrate here too, right?" She raised her glass higher, and a few people reluctantly lifted theirs in a half-hearted toast. My throat went tight. My ears started ringing. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. But my face remained blank, neutral, the same mask I had perfected over years of these gatherings. I lifted my glass mechanically, brought it to my lips, and took a sip while my mind screamed. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that room could have possibly guessed, was that exactly 48 hours earlier, I had signed the final paperwork for the acquisition of my startup. The deal was worth $9.1 million. The wire transfer confirmation was sitting in my email inbox. The legal documents were in a folder in my bag, which was currently resting against the wall near the door. I had walked into this house that morning as a multi-millionaire, and my stepmother had just labeled me the family failure in front of everyone who mattered to her. I set my glass down slowly, carefully, and looked directly at her. My voice, when it finally came, was calm and cold. "You know what? I think it's time I said something too. Since we're handing out labels this morning, I'd like to offer some clarity. Because the unsuccessful one you just described, that person doesn't exist anymore. In fact, that person never really existed, except in your imagination." My father remarried when I was 15 years old. My mother had passed away 3 years before that, and I suppose he thought he was doing the right thing by bringing someone new into our lives, someone who could fill the void, someone who could make our broken little family whole again. What he actually brought home was a woman with her own agenda, her own child from a previous marriage, and a talent for rewriting family dynamics to suit her preferences. My stepmother arrived with her son, who was 2 years younger than me, and from day one, the hierarchy in our household was clear. He was hers. I was a reminder of the life my father had before her, and while she never said it outright in those early years, her actions spoke a language I learned to read fluently. The differences started small: new school supplies for him, hand-me-downs for me, a laptop upgrade for his schoolwork while I was told the old desktop in the basement was perfectly functional, expensive tutoring sessions for his college prep exams while I was expected to figure things out on my own, because, as she often said, I was naturally independent and didn't need as much support. My father never questioned these decisions. He was too busy working, too eager to keep the peace, too willing to believe that his new wife had everyone's best interests at heart. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I tried to be the bigger person, to understand that blended families were complicated, that resources had to be divided somehow. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was simply worth less to her. By the time I reached high school, the pattern was undeniable. My stepbrother's mediocre report card was celebrated at an expensive restaurant. My scholarship to a competitive summer program was acknowledged with a distracted nod and a comment about how I should make sure it didn't interfere with my chores at home. When he made the junior varsity basketball team, my stepmother threw a party. When I won a regional science competition, she asked if the prize money could help cover my school trip expenses so she wouldn't have to contribute. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone became an exercise in inequality. His celebrations were elaborate productions. Mine were afterthoughts, small gatherings with leftover decorations and cakes from the discount bakery. I remember one particularly painful evening during my senior year. I had been accepted into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, something I had worked toward for years. I came home excited, holding the acceptance letter like it was made of gold. I found my stepmother in the kitchen, and when I showed her the letter, she glanced at it briefly before turning back to her cooking. "That's nice," she said, her tone flat. "Just make sure you figure out how to cover the rest of the tuition. We've already committed to your brother's school expenses, and you know how tight things are." I stood there, acceptance letter in hand, watching her chop vegetables as if I had just told her about the weather. My father came home later, and when I showed him, he smiled and hugged me, but when I brought up the financial concerns, he simply said we would figure it out. We never did. I took out loans, worked part-time throughout college, and graduated with debt that followed me for years. But the worst part wasn't the financial inequality. It was the narrative my stepmother built around it. To extended family, to neighbors, to anyone who would listen, she painted me as the difficult one, the lost one, the child who couldn't quite get their life together. She told people I was stubborn, that I refused good advice, that I insisted on doing things the hard way. Meanwhile, my stepbrother was held up as the model of success, even when his accomplishments were ordinary at best. He graduated college with average grades and landed an entry-level position at a law firm through a family connection. She spoke about him like he had argued before the Supreme Court. I built a business from nothing, and she told people I was unemployed. The label she eventually settled on was the one that hurt the most: unsuccessful. She said it casually, like it was an objective fact, like it was something everyone agreed upon. And because I had no traditional markers of success that she valued, no corporate job, no expensive car, no engagement ring, the label stuck. The word unsuccessful became her favorite weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. It started showing up in conversations I wasn't meant to hear, whispered asides to relatives during family dinners, comments made when she thought I was out of earshot. But I always heard them. The walls in that house were never thick enough to protect me from the things she said about my life. I remember standing in the hallway during Thanksgiving 2 years ago, about to enter the dining room, when I heard her talking to my aunt. Her voice carried that particular tone of false concern, the one people use when they want to gossip but pretend they care. "You know how it is with this one," she said, and I knew immediately she was talking about me. Still playing around with that startup thing, I keep telling them to get a real job, something stable, but they won't listen. Not everyone can be a doctor or a lawyer like my son. Some people just take their time discovering what they want to be when they grow up. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Someone coughed. An aunt looked down at her plate. My stepbrother smirked into his napkin. My stepmother wasn't finished. She never was. We call this one our little dreamer, always on that laptop, always with some new idea that never quite pans out. But hey, maybe next Christmas we'll have something real to celebrate here too, right? She raised her glass higher, and a few people reluctantly lifted theirs in a half-hearted toast. My throat went tight. My ears started ringing. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. But my face remained blank, neutral, the same mask I had perfected over years of these gatherings. I lifted my glass mechanically, brought it to my lips, and took a sip while my mind screamed.
Watch someone waste their potential like this. I stood frozen in that hallway, my hands clenched into fists, my throat tight with anger and humiliation. I didn't enter the dining room for another 10 minutes. I needed that time to force my face back into neutrality, to swallow down the words I wanted to scream. The comments became more frequent, more public, more casual. At family gatherings, she would introduce my stepbrother with a detailed list of his accomplishments and then gesture to me with a vague, "And this is my other one, still figuring things out." When distant relatives asked what I was doing with my life, she would answer before I could speak, saying I was between things or exploring options, or, most devastatingly, not quite settled yet. She said these things with a smile, with a tone that suggested maternal patience, but the message was clear. I was a disappointment. I was the cautionary tale. I was the one who proved that not everyone makes it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she never bothered to ask, was that behind the scenes, my startup was growing, slowly at first, then faster than I had ever imagined possible. The internet ideas she mocked were generating revenue. The laptop I was always glued to was the tool through which I was building something real, something valuable, something that was about to change my life completely. But I stopped trying to share these victories with my family years ago. Every time I mentioned a milestone, our first 1,000 users, our first major client, our first round of funding, the response was the same. Polite disinterest from my father, dismissive skepticism from my stepmother, a smirk from my stepbrother. So I learned to keep my wins to myself, to celebrate alone, to build my empire in silence while they continued to see me as a failure. That Christmas morning, when my stepmother stood in front of everyone and called me the unsuccessful one, something inside me finally crystallized. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't even hurt. It was clarity. I realized that no matter what I achieved, no matter how successful I became, she would always need me to be the failure in her story. Because if I wasn't the unsuccessful one, then her golden child wasn't quite as golden. If I wasn't the cautionary tale, then her parenting choices looked less justified. She needed me to stay small so her son could seem big. And I was done playing that role. I was done being the background character in her narrative. It was time to show her exactly who the unsuccessful one really was, and more importantly, who they weren't. My journey didn't follow the script my stepmother had written for acceptable success. I didn't go to medical school. I didn't pursue corporate law. I didn't climb a traditional career ladder at a prestigious firm where my title could be easily explained at dinner parties. Instead, I did something that terrified and excited me in equal measure. I built something from nothing. The startup began as an idea I couldn't shake, a solution to a problem I kept encountering in my freelance work. I was doing web development and digital marketing on the side during college, trying to pay down my loans, and I kept noticing inefficiencies in how small businesses managed their online presence. There were expensive enterprise solutions that required technical expertise, and there were cheap DIY tools that produced mediocre results. Nothing served the middle market well, so I started building something that could. The first version was embarrassingly basic. I taught myself to code properly through online courses and tutorials, spending late nights in my tiny apartment writing and rewriting functions until they worked. I couldn't afford expensive hosting, so I used the cheapest servers I could find. I couldn't afford marketing, so I built the audience organically through content creation and community engagement. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I did everything myself: development, design, customer service, sales, accounting. My family saw me hunched over my laptop at all hours and assumed I was wasting time. They didn't see the customer testimonials starting to roll in. They didn't see the revenue slowly climbing. They didn't see the moment I realized this thing I had built was actually working. The first year was brutal. I was still working freelance gigs to pay rent while pouring every spare dollar an hour into the startup. There were months when I ate instant noodles for dinner because I had reinvested my earnings into better infrastructure. There were nights when I questioned everything, when the doubt crept in and I wondered if my stepmother was right, if I was just delusional, if I should give up and get a normal job. But then a customer would email me saying my platform had saved their business time and money, or I would wake up to find 10 new signups overnight, or I would solve a technical problem I had been wrestling with for weeks, and the rush of accomplishment would remind me why I was doing this. I wasn't building a startup to prove anything to my family. I was building it because I believed in it, because I saw a gap in the market, because I wanted to create something that mattered. By year 2, things started accelerating. I finally had enough revenue to quit freelancing and focus full-time on the business. I brought on a business partner, someone with complementary skills who believed in the vision as much as I did. We landed our first major client, a mid-sized company that became a case study for what our platform could do. Word spread. More customers came. We raised a small seed round from angel investors who saw the potential. My stepmother heard I had gotten some investment and asked my father if it was a pyramid scheme. I didn't bother correcting her. I just kept building. Year 3 was when everything changed. We had grown to hundreds of paying customers and our revenue was climbing fast. We had a small but talented team. We had proven product market fit. And then the acquisition emails started coming. At first, they were easy to ignore, lowball offers from companies I'd never heard of, clearly just fishing for cheap acquisitions. But then a message came from a company I actually respected, a major player in our industry. They wanted to talk, not about partnership, not about investment, about buying us outright. The initial conversation was casual, exploratory, but over the next few months it became serious. Due diligence, financial audits, legal reviews, negotiations over valuation and terms. It was surreal and exhausting and exhilarating. The final number landed at $9.1 million. After lawyer fees, after splitting with my co-founder, after setting aside taxes, my personal take was still life-changing. It was more money than I had ever imagined having. It was more money than my entire family probably had earned collectively in the past decade. It was proof, concrete and irrefutable, that the unsuccessful one had built something real. The acquisition closed 2 days before Christmas. I received the confirmation email on December 23rd while sitting alone in my apartment. I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. Then I sat in silence for a while, letting the magnitude of it settle over me. I could have called my father. I could have shared the news immediately. But something stopped me. Maybe it was years of being dismissed by my family, years of my accomplishments minimized or ignored, years of being positioned as the cautionary tale while my stepbrother was celebrated for mediocrity. I realized that if I told them about the exit before Christmas, the narrative would shift, but not in the way I wanted. My stepmother would find a way to diminish it. She would say I got lucky. She would focus on the risks I took rather than the outcome. She would somehow make it about her son, about how his stable career was still the smarter choice. Or, worse, she would suddenly treat me differently, be kind to me, act like she had always believed in me, and I would have to smile and pretend the past decade of subtle cruelty hadn't happened. I didn't want any of those outcomes. What I wanted was simpler and far more satisfying. I wanted the truth to reveal itself at the exact moment she tried to humiliate me again. So I made a plan. I would attend Christmas at their house as I always did, bringing the obligatory bottle of wine and the polite smile I had perfected. I would let the day unfold naturally. I would not volunteer information about my success. I would wait. If the gathering passed without incident, if for once my stepmother resisted the urge to take a shot at me in front of the extended family, then I would simply enjoy the day and leave with my dignity and my secret intact. But if she did what she always did, if she couldn't resist the urge to position me as the failure one more time, then I would strike, not with anger, not with shouting, but with facts, with documentation, with numbers so large they couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I prepared meticulously. I contacted the acquisition company's legal team and requested a clean, professional letter summarizing the acquisition terms and my ownership stake. They provided it within 24 hours. Official letterhead, clear language, numbers in bold. I printed 2 copies, one for me and one to leave behind if necessary. I also prepared digital backup, a folder on my phone with screenshots of bank confirmations, cap table documents showing my equity percentage, and the congratulatory email from the acquiring company's CEO. I wasn't planning to show all of this. I'm not a monster who wants to torture people with excessive proof, but I wanted to be ready for any skepticism or attempts to discredit me.
The night before Christmas, I practiced my response. Not the words exactly, but the tone. I didn't want to sound angry or defensive. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I wanted to sound calm, matter of fact, almost bored, the way someone might correct a simple mistake. Actually, the meeting is at 3, not 2. That level of casual correction, as if the $9 million was just a minor detail they had somehow overlooked. I also mentally prepared for the aftermath. I knew that once I revealed the truth, I couldn't take it back. Relationships would shift. My stepmother would either lash out or retreat into denial. My father would probably try to mediate. Extended family would gossip about it for months. I made peace with all of that, because the alternative, sitting there and absorbing another public humiliation in silence, was no longer acceptable. On Christmas morning, I dressed carefully. Nothing too flashy, nothing that would draw attention, just clean, simple, put together. I wanted to look like someone who had their life figured out, even if they didn't know it yet. I packed my bag with the printed acquisition letter in a leather portfolio, casual enough to not seem planned, professional enough to be taken seriously. I drove to my father's house with the radio off, running through the plan one more time in my head. Wait, listen, respond only if provoked, and if she takes the bait, deliver the truth with surgical precision. No drama, no theatrics, just facts that would rewrite the entire narrative she had spent years constructing. I parked in the driveway, grabbed my bag and the wine, and walked up to the door. I rang the bell. My stepmother answered with her practiced smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, you made it," she said, as if my attendance had been in question. Come in, we're just about to sit down." I stepped inside, returning her smile with one equally hollow. Game on. The living room buzzed with the comfortable chaos of family gathering, overlapping conversations, children running between furniture, the clinking of glasses and silverware. My stepmother had truly outdone herself with the decorations this year. Every surface gleamed, every detail was Instagram perfect. This wasn't just Christmas, it was a performance of success, a carefully curated display meant to announce to everyone present that this family had made it. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, the spot I always occupied, close enough to be included, but far enough to be forgotten. I watched my stepbrother hold court with a group of uncles, describing his latest case at the law firm with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being told you're exceptional. My father sat near the head of the table, looking pleased with the turnout, oblivious as always to the undercurrents running through his carefully blended family. My stepmother clinked her glass with a spoon, calling for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turned toward her. She stood, straightening her designer blouse, her smile wide and warm in that particular way that made my stomach tighten. I knew that smile. I had seen it before every public humiliation disguised as family affection.
I just want to say a few words before we eat, she began, her voice carrying that practiced tone of maternal pride. It's so wonderful to have everyone here together. Family is everything, and moments like these remind us of what really matters. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. She continued, building momentum, clearly enjoying her moment in the spotlight. I'm particularly proud this year, she said, turning toward my stepbrother, of how far our golden boy has come. Just last month, he was promoted to senior associate at his firm. Senior associate. At his age, that's practically unheard of. We always knew he was destined for great things, and he's proving us right every single day. She reached out and squeezed his shoulder. The room erupted in applause. My stepbrother ducked his head with false modesty, clearly loving every second. She went on, detailing his accomplishments, his cases, his prospects, painting him as the family's crowning achievement. I took a sip of water, my face neutral, waiting. Then her gaze drifted to me. The temperature of her smile dropped several degrees. And of course, she said, her tone shifting to something that resembled pity mixed with condescension, we have our other dear one here too. She gestured toward me with her glass, and I felt the weight of the entire room's attention shift in my direction. This is the one who's still on their journey of self-discovery. You know how it is. Some people follow the traditional path, get the stable career, the predictable trajectory, and others, well, they take their time figuring out what they want to do with their lives. A few uncomfortable chuckles scattered around the table. An aunt reached for her wineglass. A cousin suddenly became very interested in his phone. My stepmother wasn't done. She never was. We've been calling this one our little dreamer. Always working on something new, always on that laptop with some project that's going to change the world. It's sweet, really, the optimism, but we keep hoping that maybe this year, maybe next year, there will be something concrete to show for all that effort. Something real, something we can all actually celebrate together. She raised her glass higher, her smile fixed firmly in place. So here's to hope. Here's to the possibility that next Christmas we'll finally have something tangible to toast to from this side of the table. A few people lifted their glasses reluctantly, not quite sure what to do with the awkward tension filling the room. I set my water glass down carefully. My heart was hammering, but my hands were steady. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping slightly against the hardwood floor. The room went quiet. My stepmother momentarily surprised, cheerily not expecting me to respond. I let the silence stretch for just a moment, long enough for everyone to fully focus. Can I say something? I asked, my voice calm and clear. Since we're doing public evaluations of success this morning, I think it's only fair that I contribute some accurate information. My stepmother's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. Of course, dear. We'd love to hear how things are going with your little projects. The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather portfolio, opened it carefully, deliberately, giving everyone time to wonder what I was doing. I pulled out the printed acquisition letter on official company letterhead and held it up so the room could see it was a real document, not something I had typed up on my laptop. You're absolutely right about one thing, I said, looking directly at my stepmother. I have been spending a lot of time on my laptop. I have been working on something that probably seemed confusing or pointless to people who preferred traditional career paths. You're also right that I haven't talked much about the details of what I've been building. I paused, letting the tension build. The reason I haven't talked about it is simple. I was too busy actually building it to waste time explaining it to people who had already decided it was worth their attention. I unfolded the letter and began reading, my voice level and professional. This is a formal acquisition confirmation from one of the largest software companies in our industry. It reads, in part, "We are pleased to confirm the successful acquisition of," here I'll skip the technical name, "for a total consideration of $9.1 million. As the majority stakeholder, you will receive approximately, well, let's just say my personal share is substantial, more than substantial, life-changing." The room was dead silent. I could hear someone's fork drop onto their plate. My stepbrother's mouth had literally fallen open, and Uncle made a strangled sound in the back of his throat. My stepmother's face had gone pale, her expression frozen in a kind of confused disbelief. I placed the letter gently on the table directly in front of her, making sure the letterhead and numbers were clearly visible. So technically, I said, my tone still calm but with an edge of cold satisfaction, I'm the unsuccessful one with $9.1 million, which, if I'm doing the math correctly, makes me the most successful person in this room by a factor of, well, I'll let you calculate that on your own time. I straightened up, looking around at the sea of shocked faces. Just to be clear, since there seems to be some confusion, I am not in between jobs. I am not figuring things out. I am not lost or confused or wasting my potential. I built a profitable technology company from nothing, scaled it to hundreds of customers, and sold it for an amount that most people will never see in their entire lifetime. I did this without asking this family for a single dollar, without needing their connections or their approval or their validation. Every line of code, every customer, every dollar of revenue, I earned it myself. My voice dropped lower, colder. So please, let's retire the label of the unsuccessful one, because that person you keep describing, that person doesn't exist. That person never existed. That person was just a story you told yourselves to make sense of the fact that I chose a different path, one you didn't understand and couldn't control. But the path worked. It worked better than any of us imagined, and I'm standing here now, calmly and without anger, to simply correct the record. I picked up my glass of water, took a sip, and sat back down. The silence in the room was deafening. Christmas would never be the same. The rest of the meal was a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Some relatives tried to offer congratulations, their voices awkward and uncertain, clearly not sure how to navigate the sudden shift in family dynamics. Others avoided looking at me entirely, suddenly fascinated by their food or their phones. My stepbrother sat rigid in his chair, his earlier smugness completely evaporated. My father looked shock-shelled,